Yeah. I mean, not a lot of these guys talk about it, KP, but I mean, Hamlin admitted it. It was several years ago, actually. I mean, they all see sports psychologists, I
Oh,
think,
yeah.
right? Like they're all getting some level of mental coaching here.
If they don't, they should. I will say that because it's a tool. Because it's a tool. If we're going to say a simulator is a tool, if we're going to say a weight machine or a barbell is a tool, then a sports psychologist is a tool. So why not
Yeah.
use it? Why not use it? In this day and time, why not use every tool you can to be the best driver that you can be, the best all-around driver, physically, mentally, emotionally, focus, everything that rolls into it. Why wouldn't you use that as a tool? If I was driving today, I'd probably need a team of them. Let me say that. But I would dang sure have one on my side to be able to understand where I'm at and to be able to read me and say, okay, this is what we need to do today, or this is what you need to work on. Because I look at it just as again, it's just another tool in the toolbox. And listen, some guys are so freaking mentally strong that they don't. They pay no attention to it. And I look at Brad K, and I'm gonna use Brad K as an example of something that happened today. Okay.
Yeah.
99.9% of the accidents that happen on the highway, when you run into the guy, you're the one that gets the ticket. Brad never apologized for spinning the 42. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, he never took any of the blame for that accident. In his post-race interview, he never took. Why? Couple of reasons, but one of the reasons that we're on right now is that he is so mentally focused that he doesn't believe he did anything wrong. He was so focused on pushing that car and getting back to the front and putting himself in a position, and he's so mentally strong that he pays no attention. Just because an accident happened, it just happens, man. It's just part of the game. I don't worry about it. I move on to the next race. He can deal with it that way because he's that old school guy, that old school between his ears, where he focuses on things like that. Other drivers would fret about things like that. And if you're fretting about something like that, you need a sports psychologist.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny because Dave Burns, I think he interviewed Keselowski and then he interviewed Carson Hocevar like back to back. And they had Hocevar and Keselowski, who Hocevar was the guy Keselowski hit and caused the wreck. They had talked in the care center. And like Hocevar opened his interview with Dave, like saying, "Oh yeah, I think it was my fault." Like it was probably on. I mean, he didn't quite say it that way, but it almost came off that way, you know?
Yeah, he did. Here's why RFK is running so well, and you got to give Brad K total credit, because Brad K in a very short period of time ran in the back of Hocevar, spun him, and then convinced him in the care center that it was his fault. Now, if you have those leadership qualities, you should have a cup team, because that was fascinating to me. Fascinating to me. And I appreciate, I can appreciate Carson, because Carson is the young driver. Carson is learning, and he takes that, and he takes everything that Brad said, and he listens to it. And he doesn't have that arrogance. He doesn't have that, well, it's not my fault. He wanted to learn. And Carson has done a great job in that 42 car, man. He has had some, Bristol was a phenomenal race for him. But so I love that about him. At the same time, I love that about Brad K too, that he could convince somebody that it was as much their fault or their fault more so than it was his.
Well, I was going to touch on this incident, so I'll just get the rest of your take here, because I also found it funny. Then we interviewed Austin Dillon, and I don't know if it was Kim or David interviewed him, and Dillon said, "Well, Hocevar was barely keeping it in a straight line when he wasn't being pushed, so I don't even know why Brad was pushing him. Like he almost threw even more of the blame on Hocevar. Austin Dillon did, who I understand he was frustrated, he was an innocent bystander. But what was your take on? I mean, when a guy hits a guy in the trial like that hard, is it on the guy who's doing the bump drafting rather than the guy getting pushed? Or
well, again, if 99.9% of the tickets given out are for the guy that ran into the back of the car, so I'm just going to go ahead and say that in the real world, and everyday life and civilian life. But you know what, and I know what, and I heard what Austin said, and Austin was that guy at one point in time. We were all Carson Hocevar at one point in time. We were all that guy, that kid that couldn't keep it straight, that no veteran wanted to run with, that no one did. All of us were. Don't let anybody fool you to think that even the greatest drivers in the world weren't that guy at some point in time. And that just happens to be who Carson was today. There were a lot of people pushing him in the right direction for somebody who couldn't keep a car straight. I mean, he kept Denny Hamlin down an extra lap because he jumped up in that outside line and got pushed to the front and made his lap up when Denny couldn't, or Denny thought it was his to have. So he didn't do everything wrong, and he probably didn't do everything right. But I think a lot of that was frustration, because I really felt Austin Dillon had a good car. From the time they dropped the green flag, he put himself up there in the top 4 or 5, and it kind of maintained that and kind of been one of the faster Chevys. So I'm sure Austin was extremely frustrated. And, it's sometimes we go back, and I go back in time. It's the Joey Logano syndrome. Okay. Since he was the youngest guy in the garage area, remember when everybody dumped on Joey, all that, I mean, everybody, Kevin did, Carl did, everybody went after Joey for a while. And Carson just happens to be that guy in the race today. He was the young guy, so everybody was going to dump on him.